In a world where Africans have lost their roots, it has become of vital importance to document our ways. In an effort to reverse the brainwashing of the past, where we were made to believe our ways are demonic, we are pressed to create dignified and respectful platforms to unpack our spiritual ways. Thank you, Mr. Mbele, for agreeing to sit with us. We're in such an interesting political space in South Africa at the moment. We can see that the past 30 years of governance isn't quite what we thought we were. So maybe can we start unpacking what it is that needs to happen and where we are? And I mean, how do we unpack it to the person on the ground?
To understand and for it to make sense. It's perhaps an important point of departure for the conversation that we start where we are in South Africa, right? And when we can perhaps move later into other parts of the Black world, the African continent, and other parts of the Black world. Maybe we can also talk about what's happening in Haiti and West Papua, because I always help us to understand that our problems as Black people are interconnected. And part of the problem is the disconnect that exists. Maybe I should start here when Mami Belete, as I call you, that first, congratulations on the platform, Moya, and it being where it is. And my congratulations is particularly special because when you had the idea of doing this, I'm one of the people you spoke to about this idea in Cape Town, if you would remember, that you would be going on this path. And I always admire Black people who have the capacity to translate their ideas into reality, So at some stage, the platform Moya was an idea, and it warmed my heart to see you translating it into a reality, something tangible. So ancestral blessings on that path, because many of our people are discouraged by ourselves as fellow African people and other forces to take their ideas even into reality. So it's not a small thing that you've done, it's a big thing, and I had the privilege of hearing your ideas and your vision about it, so that is the point of departure. So the other thing is what you asked, which is a very involved question about the moment we find ourselves in South Africa, right? And you find people saying it is 30 years of democracy, right? And we find ourselves in the situation that we are in. Now, even that framing itself is limiting, right? Because the polity, which is called South Africa, came into existence formally in 1910, right? And to reduce our assessment of things to 30 years of democracy is part of the problem. And it is part of what is misleading, our own aspirations and the progress that we are making, because our whole understanding of our history itself is even controlled, right? So we need to start by asking the question as to how did South Africa, the polity, come into being in the first place? So as to understand the 30 years, right? And to understand that, and many of us do not get taught this at school or at university, that the creation of South Africa was a decision of the British Parliament in September 1909. It was not even our decision. And the background to it is that what is erroneously referred to as the Anglo-Boer War, which is actually the Anglo-Dutch War, right? The period 1899 to 1906, at the end of that war, which was an imperialist war between the British and the Dutch on the one hand, who were fighting for control of our mineral resources. At the end of that war, they then took their, peace accord, if you like. They then communicated it to the British Parliament. So white people had a codessa, right, in Vereniging, which is called the Treaty of Vereniging, which sort of like formally ended the Anglo-Boer War. And they signed a peace pact that gave the structure of how they want to continue co-governing South Africa. And they sent that peace pact to Britain in 1909 after protracted negotiations. And the British Parliament in September 1909 proclaimed, they passed a piece of legislation which is referred to the Act to Constitute the Union of South Africa. And it was then by proclamation, as you know, the following year, which is 1910, that South Africa was created, right? So why is that history important? That history is important for us to understand a number of things. In the creation of South Africa, black people were not consulted or involved. Two, if black people were not consulted or involved, how then do black people factually refer to themselves as South Africans, right? It is horribly strange for me, for a black person who lives in this territory, to refer themselves as a South African. Also because in the creation of South Africa, our ancestors were murdered and raped. So there is no way we can carry the tag South Africa with pride as black people, as the indigenous people, as the native people, if we know that history as to how this name, this polity, this colonial construct, it came into being at the expense of our ancestors, at the expense of their labor, at the expense of their blood, right? Now, if we understand that, so it was essentially a project between the British and the Dutch to co-govern and co-preside over our oppression, our exploitation, right? Yeah. Which then meant we then found ourselves formally enslaved in a polity which is referred to as South Africa, which was at inception a British colony, right? And I am not sure whether we can still argue today that the South Africa we have today is still not a British colony, right? Not so much by proclamation, but by looking at whose economic interests does South Africa in its current form serve, right? Does it serve our interests as the natives, or does it serve the interest of the British and amongst others, part of the Western world? Now, what we then have as what people refer to as the 30 years of democracy, in my view, the critical question then we have to ask based on that history is the last 30 years we are having a continuation of what was created in 1910, or is it a departure, a radical departure, right? Which means a radical break with what the British created in 1910. Now, one of the ways of trying to determine whether or not what happened in the last 30 years is a break or it is a continuation is a report that was published by the World Bank just over 2 years ago. This report of the World Bank says, over 2 years ago, that currently over 80% of the strategic financial assets in South Africa are in the hands of less than 10% of the population, the majority of whom are white. That is said by the World Bank. It is not even said by people who are regarded as citizens of this country. These are external people who are telling us that the economic structure of South Africa today is no different from the economic structure that obtained at inception of the criminal colony referred to as South Africa in 1910. Essentially, the European foreigners and invaders are still in charge in South Africa, at least insofar as the economy is concerned. Which then means that the expectation that the last 30 years, or even 1994, would have resulted in a radical change, right, is a poor reading of history. Because by all accounts and by all indications, what happened in 1994 is a continuation of what was started in 1910. The difference being the management of the project has simply changed in terms of its color. But the project to make sure that black people continue to have a slave existence and Europeans continue to have the existence of the masters of our destiny and our economy, that type of dynamic continues, right? It continues. What it then means is that it brings into question a number of things. One of the things it brings into question is the Declaration of Freedom, right? It brings that into question, the Declaration of Freedom in South Africa. But not just in South Africa, but across the African continent, because many of the countries, just like South Africa, that have declared independence, as they call it in the other parts of the African continent, if you look at where they are now, you struggle to find what is the independence that is being celebrated every year, not just in South Africa, in Mozambique, in Uganda, in Ghana, in Kenya, even in Ghana, which is said to be allegedly the first African country to declare independence. Not so long ago, the very leader of Ghana was complaining that the cocoa that they produce there and the chocolate being processed in Scandinavia, they don't have control over the end product, but they produce the raw material, which is the cocoa, right? Which then shows you, the question then is that what is the meaning and the value of these independence declarations, right? That we are seeing, whether you call it democracy, whether you call it freedom, whether you call it independence, in material terms, has there been a shift in our condition as African people, indigenous people, in terms of our economic power, our control, not access to shares or credit, right? That's not economic power. Control over the means of production. And a simple example so that people don't say, but means of production, what do you mean? The capacity to create factories, right? Not to employ people in your business. That's not economic power. The capacity to create factories, the capacity to create industries, where black people are in charge of industries, not businesses, but they are in charge of industries, where you are told that the mining industry is in the hands of black people, the financial industry is in the hands of black people. You don't have that currently, right? So you have black people who have got access to credit, right? You have black people who have got access to shares and dividends, and there are people who celebrate that as economic power. It is not. It is co-option into a system that is unequal, and it is part of a strategy to make the system legitimate. And this is why you see what has happened over these 30 years. Every time there's a black person who is given some kind of shares in a previously white-owned company, one of the things that the white control media does is that they beam that black person all over our faces. And that person is then promoted as an example of what is called black excellence, right? And then it also gives the impression that black people in South Africa have moved, right? But when you look, what is actually happening is that it is a strategy to distract black people from questioning the fundamental economic power relations. And they are actually perpetuating what is called the first black at the table syndrome. And what you then find us involved in as black people is that we fight to be the first black at the table. You know, so every 10 years or so, you have this black person who is celebrated. She is the first black CEO of this company. He is the first black lawyer of this and the other company, right? So every 10 years, you have those black people that get this thing, that get paraded in our faces, you know. So I usually use the metaphor that the white system has mastered the art, right, of making certain black people visible so as to hide our invisibility, right? So they create hyper visibility of individuals so as to hide the invisibility of the group, you know. And it's part of the whole Oprah Winfrey syndrome, you know, and then we have our own versions of Oprah Winfrey's in South Africa, and we're like, you know, and black people in the US have been trapped in that, And we have also now been trapped in that thing of celebrating black people who are the first black at the master's table, right? So having understood that, what is then the conclusion? The conclusion is, first and foremost, the objective for which people like Mangaliso Sobukwe, Chris Hani, Steve Biko risk their life, right? What is called national liberation, that objective has not been achieved, right? And if anybody is honest about it, they will tell you that objective has not been achieved. And you then need to have, in my view, a new generation, right, that is going to take that project further and make sure that we conclude the business of national liberation, for which the people that I've mentioned, were not just detained and tortured, but they loved and fought for. So in a nutshell, South Africa continues to be a European criminal colony, essentially.
So then where does that bring us then? What is our power as Black people? I mean, now it's 2024. They've just introduced this GNU thing, which obviously doesn't work for us. It has no, I mean, even if the markets agree, it doesn't have any real tangible difference to us on the ground. So then?
So another thing that is important for us to understand, especially when we refer to ourselves as Black people, implied in that we must also understand that we are the owners of this land, right? We should not just use it as a construct in conversation. But at the depth of our hearts, we must understand when we refer to ourselves as Black people, we must also mean we are the owners of this land, and everything that is within this territory belongs to us. But it also implies that what must happen in this territory should be decided and determined by us. That's what being a native means. It's not just some amorphous category that you hold. It's not like some cultural pride, right? But it does not have any political and meaningful force. So part of the meaningful force that must come with it is that we must develop the capacity to determine the direction of things in our country, politically, economically, culturally, and even spiritually, right? This country, first in terms of its name, right? We must decide what its name should be if we believe it needs a name, because as things stand now, many people do not think about it. But have you ever thought about the fact that we live in a country we have not named? As the natives, we live in a country we have not named.
It's wild.
You understand? So just like if you think of it as a parent, how do you parent a child you have not even had, part in naming the child? But you are busy here parenting the child and giving the child all sorts of nutrients. But you, at the most basic and most important level, at inception, you were not involved. And you are just being brought in and say, help us parent this child. You don't know where the child was born, how the child was born, under what circumstances. But you are brought in to parent the child. And you proudly call yourself a parent to this child. That is our relationship with our own country now. That we are proud about something we don't even know how it was created. And the sad thing is that many of us are going to realize that it was not created even with us in mind. So, like I said, it is important for us to have a generation of Black people that's going to grapple with that history and accept that history for what it is. But most importantly, they need to design a new program, right, for decolonization of this part of the continent, which means a new liberation project needs to be, because we can't continue the slave existence that we have. Even those of us who live in what is called suburbs, right, we are simply sophisticated versions of the Black slavery, right? Many of us know that if you miss a check, whether it's from the business or from your employer, it's chai, like our children say, that's their language. It's chai, it's over. We know that, right? So the fact that you have Black people who live in previously white areas, that is not fundamental change, right? It is an image that obscures the reality, Because it is not a shift in the economic relations between black and white. It is not a shift. That's not what it means. And we need a program now, a program that is going to agitate for fundamental or radical change in this country that is led by black people. And my own view is that it should not necessarily be a program that is led by political parties, right? It should be led by black people, because our history over the last 100 years or so have shown us that black political parties, right, have allowed themselves to be co-opted by the system. And this is why we are having this conversation about 30 years down the line, things have not changed. It was deliberate that things have not changed, because the people who were meant to lead us, out of the clutches of colonial oppression, have found themselves sitting cushy and ended up cuddling with whiteness, right? So they were sent to go and dismantle whiteness and, restore our dignity and our humanity. They ended up cuddling with whiteness. So you need a new generation that is not beholden to whiteness in this country, because a lot of the older generation are beholden to whiteness, because many of them owe, white people all sorts of debts, right? And you can't entrust the same people with the project. So you need a new generation, I believe, of black people that is going to redefine the whole project and push for what I would call a new wave of decolonization. And not just in South Africa, because the whole of the continent needs that. The whole of the continent needs that. And for me, that should be the thinking. I think one of the biggest mistakes we'd make is to say that to want to reduce this to a South African problem. It is not a South African problem. This system prevails across the African continent, and it uses certain African countries to make sure that the system continues.
Yeah. So we're being set up against each other, basically.
Absolutely.
Why do we find that we don't have more leaders like Traore emerging? How come we only have the house slaves?
Yeah. It's deliberate again.
Yeah.
Right. It's deliberate. A lot of the things that don't look deliberate, especially as it relates to our condition, are designed. They are orchestrated somewhere. And you must also accept a lot of the black people who don't see it will dismiss you as a conspiracy theorist. Right. And what many of them don't understand is that things do not happen through osmosis. There is a group of people that's how the world works. There's a group of people that sit somewhere and decides for the rest. In any country, in any group, there is always a group of people that does that. And they sit, plan, forecast for the next 100 years or so, right? And we as black people continue to be trapped in planning for the next weekend, right? The mindset of conquering. We continue to plan for... So to digress a bit, especially here in South Africa, we are obsessed with, and I'm being critical of us, myself included, we are obsessed with planning for Makufe, planning for the Durban July, planning for, what is this other one, Cape Town Jazz, right? Those are the things that take the majority of our time, attention, and resources. And I sometimes make the point that if you see how much planning genius we put into preparing for those events, right? Makufe, Cape Town Jazz, etc., versus planning to deal with the fact that, for instance, we just learned that about 4, black children in Soweto died because they ate some poisoned things that they bought from people who are believed to be foreign nationals, right? Now, where is all the planning, the ingenuity that we used to plan for Makufe, for things like that, right? That we should be responding to. And I'm making this point not to suggest that as black people we must not engage in recreation. No, I'm making this point to show that our leadership skills are misdirected. That we have got the leadership capacity and the resource capacity to do other things, but we choose to direct our leadership skills and our resources to things that do absolutely nothing to advance us as black people, right? Then the question you asked about, why don't we have more people like Ibrahim Traore, right? There are many of those people in various countries. Ibrahim Traore is not an exception. He is the norm. If you go to every African country, there are people of the caliber of Ibrahim Traore. But what typically happens is that because the majority of Africa continues to be this massive neo-colony, right? And you have the agenda of foreign interests continue to playing itself out in various African countries. Every time the forces of foreign control notice somebody of the caliber of Traore in any of the African countries, if they can't co-opt that person is, they find a way of strategically cutting that person out, right? And they find various ways. They entice you with money, they entice you with positions. If they are not able to entice you with money and positions, they are simply going to become ruthless and they are going to find a way of eliminating you. And remember, I think there's been 4 or 5 attempts already on the life of Ibrahim Traore, and it's not surprising, it's to be expected, that if you go against, the white world and the way it is constructed, right? The white world is a ruthless world. They don't cuddle with people who threaten their interests, right? So if you don't want to become part of them, if you don't want to join their team, they're going to find a way of eliminating you, including using your own, right? Our own to eliminate you. And this is how many of our great leaders were eliminated. Sankara, who inspired Traore, was eliminated through the facility of his friend, Blaise Compaoré. Patrice Lumumba was eliminated through somebody who was regarded as his friend, Mobutu Sese Seko. Guinea-Bissau, Amilcar Cabral, somebody who was close to him, one of the officials in his army, was used to, So you find all of those things, even Malcolm X, if you look at the circumstances around Malcolm X's assassination, right? It was people close to them who were used. So all these great black leaders who are our lights, right? One of the mistakes we do, we don't protect the people who raise their necks for us, whether they are black women or black men. One of the things we are terrible at is that we don't protect them. And this is why it is difficult for even those who want to raise their necks their necks, because umuntu uye azibuza ukuthi if ngingasukuma la bazongenza, did you see what they did to so and so? So one of the things we must learn or we must correct as black people, when they are flaws, right? We must protect those black people who stand up for us, right? And protecting them does not necessarily mean you have to agree with everything they say or everything they write, right? But protecting them always means to understand that when our natural enemies try to bring them down, we should be their first line of defense, right? And this is one of the things we are struggling with, that we have left many of the black people who stand up for us to be lynched by whiteness. We have left it, and we take this very
truly
detached morality, that I can't support or seem to be defending so-and-so because on this other day he made a very problematic statement, gender-wise or political-wise. He said something that was perhaps misogynistic, or he said something that was patriarchal, or he said something that, politically or ideologically was, those things are contradictions, but they are not more fundamental than the understanding that we continue to be pitted between serious enemies, right? So those mistakes about how people articulate themselves and the tactical mistakes they make, aligning themselves with the wrong people, you can't abandon and discard those black people on the basis of they made a miscalculation, joined a particular political party or endorsed a particular leader. You must always look at the bigger picture first, right? And to say, is this person sincere, right? Even when they make mistakes, is this person sincere? And if the person is sincere, you say, no, ngowakiti lo, okay, stop, ngowakiti lo. And then once you have lo again insight, you then talk to them strongly. Ukuthi nawe yeka lo mpeto wakho. You can't continue doing this. We are supporting you because ungowakiti, but now you must understand, you must then exercise better judgment in the thing. That's how we must engage, right? And I want to use an example to show you how we are being outmaneuvered, especially in South Africa, by white people, right? So white people have got AfriForum, for instance, right? AfriForum helps all white people, regardless of whether they understand what AfriForum stands for, whether they agree with the agenda of AfriForum, because AfriForum looks at the bigger picture. Right? They don't want people who understand what their policy is and whether they can articulate the position in AfriForum. We have those demands. Which Lomuntu does not ideologically speak like us. They have something which is more fundamental, which is called race consciousness. They understand their position as a group in the world. Which if they are to survive, they need to close rank and have a supreme consciousness to understand the other contradictions that exist between them, that the other ones could be Freedom Front Plus, the other ones could be DA, the other ones could be this, does not subtract from the fact that all of them are a family. And that's how they look at themselves and their problems. And this is why you find, in the South African context, for instance, you will never find a situation where Freedom Front Plus, AfriForum, or the DA contradict each other in public. You'll never find it. I'm not saying they don't disagree. I suspect they do. But you will rarely see itself playing itself out in public. Because insofar as the fundamental agenda is concerned, which is making sure that in this country, white people remain in power and in charge, that's where they are agreed. All the other things are secondary. Right? And that's the kind of consciousness we need to develop and we need to understand, because that will then help us understand how to act, right, in spaces and in situations. But I don't think we have a sufficiently developed, what I would call race consciousness to understand we don't. We have all sorts of consciousness, but I don't think we have a sufficiently developed race consciousness. So in every African country, this is why you can't have people of the caliber of Ibrahim Traore coming out, right? Because, even look at how Ibrahim Traore is heavily guarded. Yeah. It is not madness that Ibrahim Traore is heavily guarded. It is because he and those around him have an understanding of the environment they are operating in. But even in the case of Ibrahim Traore, the majority of the attempts on his life, right, while they have been externally engineered, but the people who were prepared to carry them out were black people like him. Yeah. So we need to understand the importance of security and protecting our leaders, that people must think twice about touching any black leader. We must protect them to that extent, that people must. But at the moment, people can say whatever they want about any black leader. They can even go up to a black leader and slap the guy. A person who represents us, and nothing is going to happen to them. Nothing is going to happen to them.
It's interesting when you speak like this, because that's kind of what happened to Andile Mutama, huh? He stuck his neck out and then people just watched, and so it really is something. And then also still staying with MK, we were talking off air just now about the question I asked at the press. So do you want to unpack it?
So the issue here is
maybe start with the question that was asked.
Yeah. So the point of departure for me is we find ourselves trapped under the leadership of political parties as black people, right? And we are raised in a political culture that makes black people believe that their solutions, their salvation is going to come from political parties, right? So we have a culture of hero seeking from political parties, right? And often we don't realize how dangerous that culture is, because it also creates what is called the cult of personality, right? And hero worshipping of people and individuals. And you've seen this with many of the political parties in our country that have presented themselves as alternatives, right? That there's also an element of, the desperation for us to get a hero or a shiro, but also the danger that we don't realize. And this happened in other African countries where we could invariably be creating demigods, or what I would call political Dalai Lamas, right? Now, I am one of those people who argues that while it is important for Black people to have political organization, right? And by political organization, I don't mean the noun, which is a political organization, but I mean the verb, being organized politically,
Yes.
right? That is important. But what is more important is for Black people to be organized as Black people, not as various political parties. Because in my view, that contributes to the fragmentation. But what it also does, it undermines the ability of Black people to act as a group. Because Black people have become attached to symbols, party logos and party leaders. And you have Black people who believe they would die by the party logos and the party symbols. And they don't understand the bigger problem we are facing. Right? Now, that makes the system of racism and capitalism easy to function, because if we continue to be divided or fragmented, in our thinking and in our operation, it is easy for the people who control this country and its economy to continue. Because what they can simply do is that they can decide to deal with us as these individual groups, and they can literally pit us against each other. And as you have seen already, that unfortunately the Black political parties in our country spend more time, right, speaking ill of each other and each other's leaders, right? That is exactly what the system wants, right? As opposed to what some of us are advocating, that Black people and their organizations must look for more and more opportunities to create greater unity and solidarity. But most importantly, what we don't have currently, and I don't know if any of the Black political parties are thinking about this or whether they are willing to champion this, we don't have something that can be described as a national Black agenda. So we see the many political parties that exist and the ones that emerge and that talk radical, it's okay that they sound very radical. But what I think, what we need a clearly defined Black agenda in this country, an agenda for Black people. And for me, that is where you find that the conversation at a political level has not moved, in my view, right? And we are basically just seeing a rehash of the same type of politics, right? Where every organization that comes at every election, right, presents itself as an alternative, and they sound a bit more radical than the other one, right? But when you look at whether or not this translates into actual political consolidation for Black people, it does not.
When you say that we're just regurgitating the same thing, when I look at MK and EFF and the cult, I mean, whether it's Juju or Zuma, it's just like, so what is the actual politic?
That's the thing. Remember, this is a feature of African politics, right? It is highly patriarchal as well. It's also a patriarchal culture, that there must be this leader, and who in the majority of cases is a male figure, right? And if you study the history of African politics, especially in the 20th century, right, that has been the texture of African politics, right? That there is this one leader who's got their face on the T-shirts, and they've designed nice garments, throughout the African continent, whether it's MPLA, whether it's, whether it's KANU in Kenya, whether it's, all the African liberation movements, or SWAPO even in Namibia, right? When you just look at the party congresses, right? So, and you almost see the leader of the party resembling what you would call in church a bishop. resembling a bishop. And those are some of the things that you notice. But one of the problems with those types of cultures is that then you also have a situation where the person can't be questioned. They can't be questioned. Their views can't be questioned. And questioning them is regarded as blasphemy. So those are some of the weaknesses that come with the party political system as we know it today. So I'm saying we need to reimagine Black political organization differently, right? That it should not have some of these trappings like the cult of personality and all of the other cultures that don't allow for critical engagement with our reality from time to time and find ways of renewing, our very political project. And we don't find ourselves beholden to this one leader, right, for extended periods of time. But you have a situation where batches and batches of leaders get trained and batches of leaders emerge because you also give sustainability to the project. If you have a variety or a diversity of leaders. Yeah. But if you have the bishop type situation, and then your other problem you're going to have is when the person dies, then the organization believes the only reason to exist is to protect the person's legacy, you see, as opposed to engaging with the new reality for what it is. Then you find an organization that then reduces itself to a cultural heritage type of arrangement where everything now has to be done, statues have to be erected, memorials have to be done, as opposed to critically engaging with their reality. For instance, questions about when our organization was formed, why was it formed? And when it was formed, one of the questions was it had to engage with the system and change the system. Are we still interested in changing the system, or are we now insular, right? Meaning that we are more concerned now with preserving our legacy. So we have almost become like a political museum, right? That we are worried now about the legacy of this person, the founding fathers of the organization. Whereas when you look at where the majority of our people are, they are drowning in poverty, in deprivation, they are drowning in drugs, they are drowning in depression, and we just spoke now about the number of Black children we are seeing who are dying because they are buying poisonous foodstuffs, right? But then there's another thing that should concern all the people who refer to themselves as Black leaders or Black activists. I don't know if you've noticed, it has been happening for over a year now. Every weekend, Black people are killed by the numbers of 4 to 5, especially in Gauteng and in KZN. And we have regarded this as normal, that there are these Black young people who get killed every weekend, And I'm asking myself, what kind of people are we as Black people who think it is okay and it is normal? And this thing does not warrant an uproar. For us as Black people now, reverse this thing. Do you think if these were white young men who were dying almost every weekend, we would have peace in this country? White people were not going to allow that. But every weekend, I've been looking at it anecdotally for almost a year now. If it's not in Kailicha, if it's not in Inanda, in KZN, if it's not somewhere in Soweto, there is this group of Black young people. If they don't get killed by the police, they kill each other. And we just think it is crime. It is not just crime. There is something much deeper that is happening amongst Black people, especially Black young men. There is this deep sense of social dislocation that they have decided that the only way they are going to survive is in ways in which where they are going to have to harm other people to survive. And if you look at the caliber of the arms they use, the weapons they use weapons that are used in wars, right? They use assault rifles. Where do they get them? The sad thing is that these weapons are used against us. It is Black people killing Black people. So you can't just want to say it's violent crime. What is happening is that you have a continuation of Black people who are killing each other. And many of us, if we are honest enough, you live with that reality of knowing that you can be eliminated at any time because as a black person, you are closer to that reality. You know, that when people come and they want to take your car, they don't just take your car. They take your car, and in the process of taking your car, whether you resist or not, you get shot by another black person, you being a black person, you know. And for me, those are the things that we should be concerning ourselves with. Ukuthi singabantu abamnyama siyaphela, and siphela nje, we are dying at our own hands. You know, those are the things that we should be concerned about as black leaders, as black political parties, as black social movements, that we can't move freely in our own spaces because there is this reality now. You know, our children are being fed poison. And it's not the children of other people who are dying, it's our kids, it's black kids. So again, we can't want to all pretend that we don't see it in terms of its racial dimension. It is something that affects us. And we shouldn't be afraid to be called racist or you are stoking what you call racial wars, you know.
Race baiting.
Race baiting. It is the pain of seeing your own kind, right? Dying, being killed, black children. I mean, I'm a father, right? And I imagine I see my own children in those black kids that died in Soweto recently because of that. So nobody can expect me not to say anything about it and not to be concerned about it because it's not their kids. You know, I'm a black father. Those are black children. Those are my children too. And it doesn't have to happen to my biological children in order for me to be concerned, right? If it happens to another black person, it's happening to me.
Today it's you, tomorrow it's me.
You know,
it's interesting. So you still haven't answered us. Where to? You know, as the public, because now the latest trend is MK, and is that really what we need? And so where to? What are we supposed to do so that we can be in a better place collectively?
And then change our reality. Look, I also don't want to suggest that I think I've got all the answers, but I'll tell you what I think could be part of the solution. The forms of organization that we have been experimenting with over the last 30, 40 years have not really yielded fundamental results, right? And I do think we need to have a conversation about different forms of political organization. And what I'm going to suggest is not something new or unheard of. I think we need something which is called a united black front in this country. And by united black front, I don't necessarily mean a coming together of black political parties, right? I mean a coming together of black people, right? Political parties can become part of it, yes, but black people who come together on the basis that they have some idea on how it is we can change our reality. And a united black front that is designed to create space, even for a black individual from any part of our country who can come and sit at that table and say, I think the problem in the black schools, in my view and my experience and expertise, can be solved like this. The problem as it relates to young people and drugs in the black community, I've got expertise. I think it can be solved in this way. I'm making my expertise available. A number of other problems I can cite in the black community. So you need to have a vehicle or a platform that creates space because we don't have a shortage of solutions. You know, if you go around the country and you speak to people, there are many elegant ideas that you pick up that this idea could work. We have not tried it. What we don't have a leadership that has been able to create the space for all of those ideas or most of those ideas to come together where people feel I don't have to join a particular individual or a particular party, but I have to support an agenda. Right? And for me, I think this is what our country needs, because I can tell you now, 5, 6, 10 years down the line, or even let's say 10 years down the line, right? With the current model where we shift our loyalties from one political party to the other, we would not have made a fundamental dent in the power relations in this country, because we have evidence, not just in South Africa, but in many of the African countries, that shows that this shifting of our loyalties and our support to individual political parties, right, has not yielded any meaningful results for any African country. So South Africa is not an exception. We are just perpetuating a mistake that has been made in many African countries. And so I am one of those who think we need to rethink that form of political organization, or organization rather, as Black people, so that we have, for lack of a better example, we need an equivalent of a Black AfriForum, in my view. We need the equivalent. I don't think we need more Black political parties and more Black political leaders. Our problem is organization, is how we are organized, that we have not thought deeply about how we organize ourselves. We have some level of resources. We have some level of knowledge. You know, there are many Black people with brilliant ideas. But if they don't sing from the same hymn book, they are not able to create an impact. Right. And some of the work that some of us are doing is meant to try and engender that type of consciousness, to help many Black people see that our solution could actually come from us creating a common vehicle, which for now I call a united Black front. Right. It's not a political party. It is a vehicle that creates space and opportunity for Black people to come together to develop solutions for their day-to-day problems. You know, that's what I have in mind. And I think we could have a better conversation and we could have better results if we have that type of conversation.
So, I mean, all this organizational talk and all the strategic talk, it doesn't mean much without the economy. And the economy is still in white hands.
Sure.
So how do we work together? Because we need their money that they're stealing. We need that money.
So the other thing is, we must also think about is, in trying to change or destroy a system, we must also be careful not to think like the very system, right? Because this is part of the problem. So we must also not over-exaggerate the role or the importance of money.
Okay.
It's very important. I suspect all of us agree that money has some role in the current economic arrangement, which we have not designed. Remember, we find ourselves forced to use money. We did not have a choice in the matter, right? And so we must also not create the impression that the money-based economy is the natural order of things. It is not, right? So given our condition, we must think deeper, right? And if we are the Africans who have given birth to civilizations and we've given birth to mathematics and logic, we must think deeper than the other people. We must think deeper than and to think deeper than the other people would mean that the way in which we organize society, we must ask questions such as, do we want to continue with an economic system, right? Or a system of organization in which the value of the human being is secondary and what is primary is the value of capital in the form of, amongst others, money? Do we want to continue with that system? Because it's not just an economic system, it is also a value system. And so my point is, there are certain things we can do without having to go and use anybody's money or even selling our souls for money, right? And we must not make money the sine qua non, you know, that money is the thing that if there's no money, certain things can't be done. Because this is also how our countries are trapped in debt currently, because they are chained to this money economy, right? And we don't think of ways of developing our own forms of value, because money is nothing else but a representation of value. That's what money is. So we must also think of developing our own instruments or representations of value. So, for instance, in the type of free country or free Africa that we want to build, right, we must have our own definition of what development means to us. what progress means to us, what independence means to us. If we continue with what I called a cognitive capture, where we are cognitively trapped in how the West and Europe defines development, we are going to have this type of cycle because we will be forced to play by their rules.
Yeah.
So the point is to engage into this thing, and we need to change the rules of the rules of the game, you know. And one of the things is that we must change even how we think about things like money, so that we also protect this project against things like greed, right? Because many of these projects start very well, and then one of the things that has been used to undermine very well-meaning projects is the fact that we as Africans have failed to understand the role and the place of money, you know. And then people come with, I'll give you an example, practical example. There was an organization that was conceived by our founding fathers and founding mothers through the facility of people like Kwame Nkrumah. It was called the Organization of African Unity, right? Formally launched in May 1963 in Ethiopia, but it actually started as early as 1958 in Ghana, right? Now, that organization was supposed to become a vehicle to help expedite the decolonization of Africa. It had its weaknesses, it had its imperfections, but it was a vehicle nevertheless, right? One of the things that used to happen at the meetings of the OAU, the Organization of African Unity, some African leaders, especially the ones who came from Francophone Africa, French-controlled Africa, used to go to those meetings with bags full of foreign currency. Oh. Yes, to go and undermine the agenda of African liberation at those meetings. At the very summit, the last summit, I think it's the only summit that Thomas Sankara attended, and you must go and check out the video, where Thomas Sankara was arguing for African countries not to pay the debt that was owed to European countries. And his view was that they actually owe us, right? I always invite people to go and look at the footage where he made that speech. Go and look at the facial expression of the older African leaders, especially from Francophone Africa. They were not impressed with what Thomas Sankara was saying. And later it was discovered that they actually started the conversation of Thomas Sankara's elimination because many of them, as you know, had stolen money that they had stashed in foreign bank accounts, right? And people like Thomas Sankara were coming to disrupt their looting frenzy, right? So I'm making that point to just show you that if we don't think carefully about the position and the role of money in our projects, we might repeat those types of mistakes, right? So money has some role, but it is literally not everything, right? We can create other means of value. And the ultimate embodiment of value is the human being. Every other thing derives its value from what the human being attaches to each. Even the value that money has, by the way, if you had notes now in front of you, remember money can't talk. It can't express itself. So we don't even know what money is thinking. It has to become silly. But the value of money comes from the value that human beings attach to it. So we can retrieve that value again and decide we have been giving this thing too much value. Maybe we should tone down the value that we are giving it. So it's a no-brainer again, right? That the value that money has comes from us. So we must not think as if money has its value on its own. There, it doesn't. It's value that we have given it.
It's just that we need money to survive, so...
Not necessarily. We have been made to believe we need money to survive, right? Because if you look at what a basic human being needs to survive, right? In terms of the current capitalist relations, money has been used as an instrument to tie us as slaves to the capitalist economy. And this is why, if you look at it, it has detached us from some of the most primary instrument, which is the land. Right? So because we don't even have control over the land, we believe that we need money to survive, right? And this is why, if we continue thinking we need money to survive, we will not think we need to fight for land. Because many of us will fight to be millionaires and billionaires, right? As opposed to, and this is what I spoke about earlier, when I spoke about the difference between having economic power, controlling the means of production, and having access to credit or shares. So sometimes we say we want economic power, but what we actually want is to have access to credit or shares. You know, we want credit card type lifestyle. So you want a credit card where you would have 100K at a go, you know, and you say that's economic power. So that's the illusion of money, you know, and it's a trap. It's the illusion of money, because the people who designed the global financial system designed it such that it is a control mechanism, and that the only way you are able to participate in it, you have to play by their rules.
All right.
You know, so as African people, we can't afford to find ourselves trapped in the worshipping of money, right? And you have seen what has happened to black celebrities. Look what is happening around people like P. Diddy now. You know, we are not happy about what is happening around him as black people, but one of the things that lands them in those positions is their relationship with money.
Yeah.
You know, it's a relationship with money. Now, P. Diddy has a lot of money, but strangely enough, what is that money doing for him now to get him out of that situation? It does not seem like the money is helping him to get out of that situation, right? And this is because he may have accumulated a lot of money, but has he accumulated power? It's the question. Because if he had accumulated power, he should have been able to get himself out of that situation. And it doesn't look like, you know, and he seems to be sinking deeper and deeper if you follow the story. And it looks like there are many others that are coming. And all of them are black people who've got serious money.
So it's not about money.
No, it's not. It's about understanding what matters and what we are made to believe matters. Because we must also understand that we live in a world of images, right? We are made to value things that have no value, and we are made to turn our backs on things that actually have value. That's how black people are trapped in the system.
Fine. So my last question again, and I keep coming back to it, which is, okay, so what do we do? The people on the ground, what do we do?
We should organize, right? We should get ourselves organized, because we can't complain perpetually about our condition and excel at complaining, right? And I take this from what some of our freedom fighters have taught us, that you are not given freedom, you take it, right? And that's the thing we must understand. So we're waiting for somebody to come from somewhere, right? Some political party or some political... It's never going to happen, right? And one of the problems with black people, I always say this, we have a problem of outsourcing our destiny to other people, including other black people. And that is one of the things we must change. We must organize ourselves on the basis of what we regard as our challenges and get like-minded people together to solve those problems. And what makes me so confident, the work that you are doing and the work that I am doing, right, is organization. We have identified a problem in society and we have decided to do something about it. That in itself is progress. What we perhaps need to think about is how we bring our various initiatives together to create a bigger impact, because the work has already started. Now, I know people want to see big bang, progress. It's not going to happen like that. You have to understand that the nature of the problem that we are faced with would require that we do things gradually, right? So that whatever solution we put in place does not collapse because we have rushed it. Because we sometimes assume we understand the nature of the problem we are pitted against as black people. I also thought so at some stage, but the more I read, the more I research, the more I realize that The type of condition and problem we are confronted with as Black people is much more complex than we realize. But you have a better chance against any system if you are organized.
Thank you.